It all started with a message sent by mistake. Or at least, that's what he thought. "Hi, we met at the corner cafe on Tuesday. You left your notebook here." The message came with a photo of a black notebook, filled with scribbles and little sketches along the margins. A notebook that did, in fact, look familiar. Just one detail: he didn't go to cafes, and definitely not that one on a Tuesday. Still, he replied, "Not sure it's mine, but it looks interesting. What's inside?" On the other side, she hesitated, then typed, "Stories, some sad, some I never finished." From that point on, the conversation took a strange rhythm, part cautious, part strangely intimate for two strangers. His name was Raphael. She said her name was Clara, but her name wasn't Clara, and she knew exactly who Raphael was. It hadn't been a mistake, or a coincidence. She had known him for years. She knew his silences, the way he ran his fingers through his hair when uncomfortable, the way he avoided his own emotions. She knew him because she had once been part of his life, a part he had erased, or tried to. But she needed to see him one last time, not to win him back, not to reopen wounds, just to know if, after everything, he was still the same, or if time had erased even the memory of who he had been. She created a new version of herself, and for the first time in a long while, he answered. Clara, or rather the name she had chosen to get closer to him, didn't want to seem intrusive, so she kept the conversation light, almost casual. They talked about books, places they had never been, things they would write if only they had the courage. Raphael, little by little, started to open up. There was something about those messages that felt different from any interaction he'd had before. She didn't ask about his life, his past, or anything too personal, but she listened, truly, with rare attention. Maybe that's why he started writing more. About the longing he pretended not to feel, about the nights he slept with his eyes open, about a woman he had lost, or let go, without knowing how to fight for her. She read every line in silence, her heart tight. She wanted to say, "It's me. I was there. I saw it all happen. I knew you better than you let anyone see." But she couldn't, because if she did, he'd block her. Or worse, he'd reply with indifference, as if she were just a mistake from the past. So she pretended not to know, pretended to be hearing those stories for the first time. One night he wrote, "It's strange. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to someone who already knows me." She took a while to reply, and when she finally did, she simply wrote, "Maybe we recognize certain souls, even when they change their names." On the other side, the silence lasted longer than usual, but when his reply came, it was different. "Would you give me a chance to meet you beyond the words?" She knew this moment would come. She just didn't think it would hurt so much. She took 2 days to reply. 2 days reading and rereading that question. Would you give me a chance to meet you beyond the words? She could have simply said no, made up an excuse, disappeared. But it was too late. She had already crossed the line, and deep down, she did want to see him, not to start over, but to say goodbye, the right way. She accepted the invitation. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe downtown late in the afternoon. She arrived early, chose a table by the window, carefully positioned, not too exposed, but with a clear view of the door. She wore a light blouse and a simple coat, her hair pulled back, nothing flashy. She wasn't trying to impress, just not be immediately recognized. When he walked in, time seemed to pause. Raphael looked exactly like she remembered, but with a calmer gaze. He carried a book under his arm and his phone in his hand, scanning the place for someone he believed he'd never seen before. She gave a small wave. He approached. "Clara?" he asked with a shy smile. She nodded, and in that instant, something in him hesitated, as if something bothered him, but he couldn't quite name it. "You have a familiar voice," he said, adjusting his jacket on the chair. She gave a faint smile. "Sometimes we meet people before we actually see them." The conversation was light, almost trivial. He spoke about the messages, how it felt like she had appeared in his life at just the right moment. She listened, heart pounding. Every word he said was a wound opening and closing at the same time. And then, as he looked down to stir his coffee, she stared at him. There he was, the man she had loved, the one who had hurt her, the one who had forgotten her, and who now smiled at a woman who didn't exist. As he spoke, she watched him in silence. It was strange to see how time had changed the smallest details, the way he gestured more calmly, how he paused before replying, how he looked away when something touched too deeply. But inside, he was still the same man who shut down when he felt too much, who ran from real connection because he feared getting hurt, and who, in the end, always hurt the one who wanted to stay the most. She wasn't there for revenge, nor for confrontation. She was there because after everything, she still cared, and she wanted to see him without pain, even if only for 1 hour. "You seem calm," he said at one point. "Maybe it's just tiredness," she replied without lying. She was tired, not physically, but of carrying memories that always seemed heavier than the present. Then he said something that quietly shattered her. "I once had someone like that, with calm eyes and a strong presence, and I let her go." "Why?" she asked, already knowing the answer. He hesitated. "Because I didn't know who I was back then, and I thought she was just another chapter. Now, I know she was the whole book." She swallowed hard. If he only knew he was talking about her, if he knew that woman was sitting right in front of him. But he didn't, and she wouldn't tell him. Because what brought her there wasn't the desire to be recognized, it was to recognize. She needed to see him with the eyes of the present. She needed to know if she still felt. And in that moment she knew. Yes, she did. But it wasn't love anymore. It was acceptance. She had stopped wanting to go back, and she was finally ready to move on. The cafe was nearly empty when she looked at the clock. "I should go," she said with a calm smile, but no rush. "Already?" he asked, genuinely disappointed. She nodded, slowly picking up her bag. No need for dramatics, no intention to prolong anything. The truth was, there was nothing left to say. "It was nice meeting you," he said, standing up too. She looked at him for a moment. She almost said, "I already knew you." But instead, she simply replied, "It was nice, being known like that." Outside, the sky had already darkened. The city moved on, indifferent, as if nothing important had just happened in that small cafe. And, in a way, nothing had, except for her. Because at that moment, watching him from a distance as he disappeared among cars and lights, she felt something she didn't expect: peace. There was no anger, no more longing. The pain that used to be loud had finally turned to silence. She had gotten what she needed. And him? He would go home without knowing, without realizing who he had really met, without noticing that, for a few minutes, he had the chance to face the story he once walked away from. But that was okay. Some stories don't need to be relived. They just need to be closed, with dignity. And this one had finally found the ending it deserved. Months passed. Clara moved on with her life. She didn't change cities, didn't change her number, didn't forget what had happened. But finally, she stopped carrying the past as if it were guilt. One afternoon, while organizing an old drawer, she found a yellowed envelope addressed to him. It was the letter she had written years ago, and never had the courage to send. She remembered how her hands trembled as she wrote each line, how she thought about going to him, how, in the end, she had folded the letter and decided that time would do its part. She sat down at the table, read it, didn't cry. It was a version of herself that no longer existed. Still, when she finished, she picked up a blank sheet, wrote just one sentence. "You never read it, but I managed to live." She folded the paper, placed it inside the old envelope, and sealed it again. Not to send it, but to finally close, for good, a chapter that no longer hurt. In the final scene, we see Clara walking down a quiet street, hair loose in the breeze, a small new notebook in her hands. The past stayed on paper. The story that matters now is the one she's finally ready to write. Raphael couldn't quite explain why, but in the days following the meeting with Clara, something inside him began to shift. There was a subtle discomfort, like he had left something behind and only realized it after crossing the bridge, as if a part of the past had brushed against his skin without asking permission. He tried to go on with life as usual, but that look, that voice, they echoed in places he had sworn were already empty. He reread the old conversations, every sentence, every pause, and then, not fully knowing why, he opened an old box stored on the top shelf of his closet. Inside were memories he hadn't touched in years, letters, photographs, a forgotten bracelet, and a black notebook, the same one from the photo. He sat on the floor, the notebook in his lap, and felt the weight of everything he never had the courage to write. Interrupted stories, unfinished sentences, and between the blank pages, a name he hadn't said out loud in a long time. Isadora. She had left without explanation, or maybe with all the ones he ignored at the time. She had told him what she felt, but he didn't know how to listen. She had loved with tenderness, but he wanted more intensity. And when she stopped trying, it took him too long to notice. For a moment, he thought, what if Clara wasn't just a coincidence? What if that woman had been sent somehow to remind him of who he once was? But it was too late to ask. He had no way to contact her. The profile had disappeared, and all that remained was a memory that only now seemed real. Raphael closed the notebook, lay back on the floor, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't the one narrating his life, and maybe he had missed the chance to rewrite the most important chapter. Isadora didn't expect anything from him, not a message, not a phone call, not even a sign of regret. She knew who Raphael had been, and maybe still was. She knew he hid from his feelings, used words to escape, and silence to push people away. But that night, after the cafe, she cried, not from sadness, from relief, because for the first time, she was able to look into his eyes without losing herself. She could hear his voice and not fall apart. And most of all, she was able to walk away, not because he pushed her, but because she chose to go. She felt whole. Back home, she wrote in her journal, "He recognized me, not with his eyes, but with his soul, and that's enough." In the days that followed, Isadora kept writing, not for him, not about him, but for herself. The words that once bled now flowed like a river. She wrote about peace, about freedom, about the kind of love that doesn't hold you back, doesn't demand, but simply passes through and transforms. And then, one day, walking down the street at sunset, she saw in a shop window a notebook just like the one he had. She smiled, bought it. On the first page, she wrote, "For all the stories I'm still going to live, without hiding from myself." She closed the notebook, held it tightly, and kept walking. She didn't look back. There was nothing left there. Raphael never saw her again. Not on social media. Not by chance on the streets that once always seemed to cross paths. It was as if she had vanished with the same lightness with which she appeared. But something about her remained. Not as a painful memory, but as an echo. One of those silences that doesn't hurt. It just reminds you something real happened there. Sometimes he found himself wondering if her name had really been Clara. If that pause in her gaze, that restrained smile, that way of listening, had been imagined, or clues to a deeper truth. He never knew. But what he did know was enough to change something inside him. He began writing again, without rush, without expectation, just for the simple pleasure of turning feeling into words. On the first page of the new notebook, he wrote, "Some stories don't need to be told to make sense. It's enough that we lived them." He didn't know where she was, but somehow he felt she was doing well, and that was enough. Because some connections aren't made to last. They're made to awaken. And Isadora, even without revealing who she truly was, had done exactly that. She awakened in him what he had long let fall asleep. Time passed as it always does, without hurry, without fanfare. Isadora went on with her life, carrying the lightness of someone who no longer needs to be seen to feel alive. She no longer searched for grand endings, just simple truths. And between quiet coffees, small trips, and letters written to no one, she learned to enjoy her own company. One of those days, she walked into a small neighborhood bookstore. She wandered between the shelves without intention until she saw, displayed in front, a dark-covered book with a quiet title, "Before I Forgot Myself." She opened it out of curiosity. Right on the dedication page, it read, to the one who had the courage to see me, even when I was hiding. And something inside her warmed. She turned a few more pages. The words smelled like memory. There was no famous author's name, but she knew. That was his voice. Raphael had written, not about her, not directly, but about what remained of her inside him. She smiled, not from longing, but from gratitude. She closed the book, walked to the counter, paid in silence. On the way out, she held the copy close, like someone holding a final answer. Outside, the sun was hiding behind clouds, and with the book in her arms and peace in her chest, she knew. Some stories don't return, but they walk with us, not in memory, but in the way we choose to live from now on. 3 months after that quiet visit to the bookstore, Isadora sat by the sea. It was late afternoon, and the wind carried the scent of salt and memory. She was writing slowly, her feet in the cool sand, the notebook open on her lap. There was no rush. The words no longer bled. Now they bloomed. Across the city, Raphael was giving an interview on a local radio station. His book had started gaining readers, not many, but intense ones. And for the first time, he felt like people were reading him from the inside out. Not because of beautifully written phrases, but because of the honest pauses between them. In the middle of the interview, the host asked, "This book feels like a confession, and like longing. Did you write it thinking of someone?" Raphael gave a faint smile, took a deep breath. "Of myself, of what I didn't live, but also of someone who helped me see that. And does that person know?" He hesitated. "I think so, but maybe not in so many words." That same evening, Isadora received an unexpected message. It wasn't from Raphael. It was from a woman named Lara, an independent editor who had stumbled upon Isadora's old blog and was touched by the writing. "Do you still write?" The question was simple, but it touched somewhere no one had reached in a long time. Yes, she still wrote. She just didn't share anymore. She had grown tired of waiting for feedback, applause, validation. But now, it felt different. They talked for days, and when Lara asked if she'd publish a collection, Isadora didn't say yes right away. She went to her desk, pulled out the envelope with the letter she never sent, and reread it. At the end, she wrote on a fresh page, "If words once set me free, maybe it's time to let them do it again." Isadora's book was released 6 months later. It was called Things I Felt in Silence. It was small, delicate, with a soft cover and a quiet title in tiny letters. Almost shy. At the launch, she signed copies with a smile, hearing readers say, "It feels like you wrote about me." And in every reply, there was a piece of the woman who once had to hide just not to hurt anymore. Raphael didn't go to the launch, but he saw it. He read it. And on the last page, where she left just one sentence, he knew. "The truth is, I came back. I just didn't say my name." He closed the book and, for the first time, didn't feel guilt. He felt peace. Not every story needs to return. Some go on, even from afar, and others only truly begin when we stop pretending they ended. Some stories don't need a happy ending. They just need an honest one. A final period written softly, by someone who chose to stop waiting for answers that were never coming. Because sometimes the greatest courage isn't in going back, but in moving forward, even with a heart full of unanswered questions. Isadora didn't need to be remembered. She needed to remember herself, and Raphael didn't need to uncover the truth. He just needed to feel the silence that remained, and allow it to say what words could not. Maybe you too have a story that didn't end the way you wanted, but that doesn't mean it wasn't important, or that you came out of it any less. Sometimes we grow precisely when we realize that not everything we feel needs to fit into a we. And then the page writes itself, with more peace, with more truth, and most of all, with love for who we choose to become from here on out. If this story touched something in you, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? I'd love to hear how it made you feel. Leave a like, share it with someone who needs this today, and subscribe to the channel to keep traveling with me through stories that whisper, but stay. Now click on the next video that will appear on your screen. because maybe the next story is yours.